Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Andrea Pirro, the Director of the Visiting Artists Program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's program featuring artist Kimsooja and her son, architect Jaeho Chong. The Visiting Artists Program hosts a variety of public talks by some of the world's most influential artists, designers, and scholars, and provides a platform for innovative ideas that inspire and educate. We're incredibly honored to have Kimsooja and Jaeho Chong visit SAIC for a 3-day residency and to engage with our community. I'd like to thank our special guests for taking the time to be here and for sharing their expertise with us. Tonight's lecture concludes the Visiting Artists Program's spring season, and please look out for our fall schedule that will be announced later this summer for our fall schedule. Before the program starts, I just have a couple reminders. If you could please silence your cell phones and note that video recording of the talk is not permitted. However, you will be able to view a recording of this program as well as other lectures from this season as well as seasons past on our YouTube channel. At the end of the talk, we'll have time for a few questions from the audience before the program concludes by 7:30. So please raise your hand and our staff will get a microphone to you. If you could please keep your question concise so we can get to as many questions as time allows, we would appreciate that. So thank you again for joining us tonight. And now I welcome to the podium Mary Jane Jacob, Professor and Chair of the Sculpture Department at SAIC, to introduce Kimsooja and Jaeho Chong.
Good evening. Anyone who has been in the presence of the work that Kimsooja and Jaeho Chong bring into the world knows that in these encounters, we cannot linger as spectators, but we are urged to be participants. And we're not just participants in the sense of our bodies moving through the space they create or doing some action. It is a call to consciousness. Take the early masterpiece, Needlewoman. It is art of being in the world. And this is not just because Kimsooja stood in crowds in over a dozen cities around the world, but rather, as Japanese scholar Okakura Kazugo explained, the art of being in the world is making oneself a vessel into which others might freely enter. In Needlewoman, Kimsooja is at once the point of the needle, piercing the crowd, and the eye of the needle, through which she opens our vision, as she, at the same time, threads these disparate places around the globe into one humanity. We at SAIC were lucky enough to have shown the work of these artists in the Sullivan Galleries, where Mumbai, a laundry woman, was projected onto hanging cloths in our former city block-long exhibition space. There, audiences experienced this Indian city flowing out onto Chicago's State Street. Kimsooja and Jaeho's exhibitions have been staged in literally every place on the art map that is Distinguished Point. Why, at this very moment on view is an installation that consumes the central rotunda of La Bourse-Pinot in Paris, a museum intervention in Leiden, the Netherlands, as well as a gallery exhibition in Belgium and opening next week, one in New York, with a group exhibition in Antwerp, and until last week, one in Saudi Arabia. As you no doubt have read on the Visiting Artists Program's fine online materials, Jaeho Chong has a master's in architecture from Yale and a Bachelor of Architecture from Cooper Union. He is principal of the Seoul-based architectural firm Gongwon, where he undertakes collaborative research and is able to, on the one hand, create projects with Kimsooja, some of which you'll hear about tonight, and on the other hand, his own buildings. Yet all the work he does is addressing the human experience. Kimsooja is based in Seoul and Paris. She attended Hong-Ik University in Seoul, where she did both her graduate and undergraduate studies in painting. But she went on to cross other media, from sewing and sculptural objects to performance and video to museum and site-specific installations and even curating. In the process of making her work, Kimsooja has at times experienced a state of enlightenment. And it is in these times that she has observed enlightenment can be gained from seeing reality as it is. Now, I can't promise you you're going to leave this evening more enlightened, but we're going to give it a try. Thanks.
Good evening. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be back to Chicago Art Institute. Since I've been teaching, I've been having a pleasure to teach at the school in 2010 with Mary Jane Jacobs' invitation, and also a solo show, Mumbai, a laundry field, in the Sullivan Art Gallery. Today is it's special also for me because I can also introduce my son, but also my long-lasting collaborator, Jaeho Chong, who can also talk about our collaboration and his perspective on my work and also his practice. So, Jaeho, maybe you can talk briefly. Yeah.
It's also my wonderful pleasure and honor to be here with all of you tonight. And thank you, Andrea and Mary Jane Jacob, for inviting us here. And so we've prepared a lot of images for you this evening. I think first, it'll be important to contextualize Kimsooja's work from the early sewing work that she did as a painter. And the second part of the presentation will go a little bit more in depth into the behind the scenes of a few projects that we've selected for you.
Before I speak, maybe I should talk about Chicago Art Institute Visiting Artist Program. That is excellent because I've been participating, visiting artists, many different places around the world. But I think Chicago Art Institute is the most professional and really advanced program than any other place in the world. So thank you so much for your invitation, Mary Jane Jacob, and also your meticulous work for having us, Andrea. Thank you. So today, I would talk about the relationship, how I could collaborate with architectural projects with my collaborator, Jaeho, in relationship to the bodily experience within the space, but also with my few discovery in my practice, such as crucifix and needle, mirror, and botari, which has been the key element that convey my idea on surface of the canvas and self and the other, and also existential questions that expanded to the spatial dimension and beyond. So this is the one of the early 80s printmaking that I did with my body, and based on the cross structure. Before I started sewing, but this piece.
Just 1 second.
Yeah, it's a bit delayed.
This is the image.
A study on body I did in 1981. It's a series of different type of bodily form that is based on verticality and horizontality that create different spatial and color dimension around my body. And this became in the early 80s while I was questioning on the structure of the world and also the structure of the canvas and the surface of the canvas as my main question. And the moment when I was starting sewing was when I was sewing a bed cover with my mother. When the needle was touching on the surface of the silk, I had an exhilarant, almost like electric shock. The energy that came from the universe that hits my body and reached to the point of the needle. And I realized that conveys the structure of the canvas that is already vertical and horizontal. At the same time, the vertical action of putting needle onto it to reach to the other and to reach to the wall and border and boundaries that in a way allow me to circulate by wrapping the thread around the fabric. So this series of sewing pieces using used clothing from my grandmother, mother, family members, sometimes anonymous people's used clothing, such as deductive object, mind and the world, has been also parallelly developed in my career along the way to extend to the wrapping series of object series called deductive object since 1990. I was doing this in a very intuitive and impulsive action, and I had the urge to do it, wrapping the object, vertical and horizontal way of wrapping, and somehow it's protecting them. Somehow it's revealing its own form without trying to make something else. So in a way, the whole process was circulating the movement, in a way, performative action that I realized later on it is possible because the nature of sewing has already the nature of wrapping in it by wrapping the fabric with the threads around the surface of it. So this series of used daily life objects, framework, window frames or ladders or dryers and so on, has been explored to rediscover, reinforce the existing vertical and horizontal structures. And later on, I realized that this movement, performative action, allowed me also the wrapping the botari bundles, which is, in a way, the vertical way of construction of the horizontal plane, intertwining the top part to close them, which I consider as a three-dimensional sewing. So this piece was at PS1 Studio that I wrapped up everything of the sewn pieces in a botari bundle. When I discovered this red bundle sitting in the studio, I had that bundle all the time around me, but at that moment, I discovered this bundle completely new as three-dimensional painting, object, and sculpture, which has been done by one knot. So from this moment, I rediscovered this botari as an art piece, as a already used object rather than ready-made. So my practice working on the botari started from PS1 Studio, like this. The Sewing into Walking video I made in 1994 was not intended to show a video making or image making, but to make a document of my daily life practice, how I use my bed cover fabrics and work with that. But then when I work in the editing room, I discover this body of this body seems to be a symbolic needle that weaves the big fabric of nature. So that's the moment that I started looking at my body as a needle, as a symbolic needle. But at the same time, there was the moment that video making and video screen or camera lens as a wrapping action, as an immaterial way of wrapping the reality of life and nature. So I started making video not because I was interested in image making, but because of the idea of exploring the immaterial way of wrapping parallelly to physical way of wrapping in my career. So these fabrics are mainly used Korean bed covers that has been used and abandoned, but mainly used for the newly married couples. That has all the symbols, embroideries that wishes all the love, good life, many kids, or long life. All the symbols are in it. We carry on. But in a way, I find this bed cover fabric as our frame of life, and that keeps our life and death story in it. So for me, this is my canvas that keeps the life story and memory of life and couple's story, and also its own aesthetics of Korean 오방색 aesthetics, which is 5 directional color spectrum that has almost Westerners' rainbow color spectrum, but we have different characteristics, sense of directionality and seasons, and even taste in that color dimension. So wrapping the bundle for me was, in a way, embracing the humanity, or embracing a person, or embracing also myself, because normally I would place the used clothing inside. Sometimes anonymous people, sometimes places like Japan when they had a tsunami, also some war zones. I always dedicate my botari pieces to the specific location and social context as well. But this singular botari that is the least belonging of human being when we are in urgency or in war zone or any danger in our lives and social context. This also, shows in the Botari truck I performed in 1997 for 11 days, moving throughout the cities and villages I used to live and have memories. So that was the Cities on the Move, 27 kilometers Botari truck I made in 97. And since then, I had a few iterations, and the one before is the one I made for the Venice Biennale, that I dedicated the piece for the Kosovo refugees. Actually, it was the moment Kosovo war has been happening right around the corner of Venice, basically. So I couldn't, do any other pieces except before I commemorate their sacrifices from this violence. So after that, actually I moved to New York in 1999, and the first piece I did was a needle woman in CCA Kitakyushu, actually juxtaposed one piece in Tokyo I performed, and also one piece in the nature called A Needle Woman Kitakyushu. I was laying down on the rock, has been juxtaposed together. Since I consider my body as a needle, this has been a more concrete experience for me, the nature of needle, and also experienced inner kind of enlightenment in a way while I was doing performance. When I was walking on the street in Shibuya, I was so overwhelmed by the humanity, and people come and go around my body. So I was completely planted my body on that spot, and I did start the performance as a standing still. That's how my Needle Woman started, and I decided to meet everybody in the world. So basically, I visited 8 metropolises since then, and then each location of the performance, in a way, my body becomes like a barometer of the society and also the fabric of the society and economy or races or religious kind of background. So it was for me eye-opening experience to see what is going on in this world. So that made me also to continue another 6 series of Needlewoman for the Venice Biennale 2005 to visit cities in trouble, cities in difficulties, such as Cuba, Havana, or Rio de Janeiro, or Nepal in Bhutan when they had a civil war, and also all the cities that has been issues with post-colonialism and violence and poverty issues. But at that time, I experienced and I explored my body in a way more as an axis of time while I was exploring the social context by reducing the speed so that my body in a way stays on a 0 point as unmoving body reduced the time, became almost like a frozen time. And then the rest of the people around my body would delicately pass by my body and leave a certain kind of emotion when they pass by. And, these African cities, like in Lagos or Jamena in Chad, has been especially very interesting because they were also standing still as like me, just watching me what I was doing. After series of these, doing this series of performance, I've been also parallelly doing a laundry woman performance. This one happened in Delhi, in India, in 2000, next to the Yamuna River, next to the cremation place. So when I was focusing, looking at the frontal focal point, I was so focused. And at one time, I was completely confused whether it is my body or the river that is running. And after the performance, I also realized that I was confused that much because of that concentration I had, almost like a needle point. And that needle point is, in a way, 0 point that doesn't occupy any space but location. So that end location, that location actually is open to the whole world and whole space that can be beyond the existent, beyond the physical location of the needle point. So I think in a way, the needle has been evolved with that element, that possibility of expanding beyond the location that can be expanded to the space and beyond. This piece called Buttari Alpha Beach was filmed in 2001 in Nigerian Alpha Beach, where African slaves were sent to the Atlantic Ocean. And I was so saddened and touched by the fact that, and also the concern of the humanity and difficulties they had. And I felt that almost the waves would come backward towards their home nation. So I flipped the sky and the ocean around so that the waves, the ocean waves, is almost like moving, waving towards us. There was, in a way, the horizon that I've seen on that shore was one of the most saddest line in my life. So that was the very special moment for me, and think about the destiny of slaves. But then Mary Jane Jacob, actually in 2002, right after that, invited me for Spoleto Festival in Charleston, where all the African slaves were imported in a way. So, and also there were also the Civil War in the past. So the concept, the theme was about the earth and the water. So I used this lighthouse, which hasn't been used for the last 40 years at the time, first lit with the color light spectrum. And we have fond memory of taking a boat together with the audiences and viewing the changing color spectrums as if this lighthouse is a woman's body that awaits for their husbands, fathers, and sons to return from from their depart for their war. And then I also created a series of 4 carpets, which embedded all the names of slaves, which I found from Drayton Plantation House. Mostly they had only first names, and not many people had a last name, and they were just named as if as the owner would just call them. If they are Paris, their name would be Paris right away. So that was also one very sad, reality. So that I wanted to juxtapose the nature of weaving, the carpet weaving, taking as a plantation in a way, a similar action of plantation, so that their names will be remembered in that woven carpet in black and white. So these were also shown another time in Poitiers project in 2019 through 2020. We will show in another location. Another also series of, in a way, moving painting for me is to breathe invisible mirror, invisible needle that I created with a color spectrum after the Lighthouse Woman Light Project. So using the La Fenice Theater fire screen, I projected the moving video spectrum together with my sound performance called The Weaving Factory, that I took my breathing as a weaving performance, so that the whole project was called To Breathe. So my To Breathe project started from there. And so here, since actually I didn't mention about the mirror presence at the Venice Biennale project in 1999, the Dappertutto or Pottery Truck in Exile, I placed the mirror panel in front of the Arsenale space, so that it wraps the whole space of the Arsenale, and then also open up a new passageway for the totality truck. So that was the first mirror piece I did in my practice. But this was second one. I placed the mirror on the floor when I commemorate the Korean Hawaiian immigrants for their centennial at the Hawaii City Hall. So people would sit and lay down as if the installation itself is like a sailing boat with the gauze, moving from the open air, the ceiling, blowing the almost like a yacht. This piece was also related to immigrants and border issue. As GSA invited me for making a permanent installation, I decided to make a video performance inviting the people from Mexico who commute to the US every day as a commuter, and so that their face, frontal face, and also their back, and also when I call their name, they would turn around so that they show their identity. So the border occupies with, in a way, psychological border as well as their bodily border. So this border issue has been all related also my question on the surface and the canvas that is also extended to social border as well. Continuing my concern about the world and violence and wish for the peace and harmonious world, I created this lantern installation in Ravenstein Gallery in Brussels, using almost 2,000 Korean Buddhist lanterns, also with the sound of 3 chants in it, the Tibetan monk chant, Gregorian chant, and also Islamic chant. Interestingly, those 3 chants that are from totally different civilization, religious background and belief, when they were playing together, it was very harmonious actually, and it was very peaceful too. So I wished, coexistence of our world as one. That was my prayer, in a way, for the world peace. And this was also for the peace for the world, because it was installed in Yonggwang nuclear power station water break, using 8 different video installations, earth, water, fire, air, that I've been filming in different places around the world, conveying the interrelationship between matters, between natural elements, water related to earth, or fire relate to the air or the earth, or the sky related to the water, or the icebergs with the water. So all these elements actually is all interrelated. So not a single person or natural element even can stay by itself. That's the message I wanted to explore, but at the same time, the peaceful use of nuclear power as well. The diffraction grating film was discovered to do this Crystal Palace A Mirror Woman piece, was in 2006 in Madrid. And that was the first actually architectural botari piece I made, considering the architecture itself as a botari. So I wrapped the architecture with a diffraction grating film and placed the mirror as to, in a way, complete the half of the upper level ceiling structure to, in a way, to complete as a totality, as a botari. So since then, I've been collaborating also with Jaeho as my practice became more and more architectural, interaction and architectural development. So with this, we also continued Korean Pavilion, yes. Similar practice, but in Korean Pavilion in 2013, it was also the moment when Hurricane Sandy came, and I was very affected by the fact that I had to live in the darkness in the East Village without light for over 2 weeks. And that made me really question on the unknown and our fear about the unknown. So I created one small room with an anechoic chamber. So it is a completely dark and soundless, so that you enter the space and your sensory become more alert and aware of your own bodily experience and your presence. So this diffraction grating film project continued also at the Centre Pompidou Metz with the same kind of video projection I did in the La Fenice, but this time placing the mirror on the floor so that the video projection was, in a way, floating painting. But interestingly, in this light level and intensity of projection, I discovered the video light became pigment light, pigment color. It was like a moving painting for me. So it was a quite surprising discovery this time, so that I was also, continue questioning on the reflection and also diffraction and transmission element of the light. And these are the images in different time of the day, so that when it is darkened, it becomes more like a light effect. So we can move, and then, so different, sometimes we see direct sunlight from outside, sometimes from city light, reflects from inside. and sometimes also totally different light effect. Although I use exactly the same material as a diffraction grating film, depending on the structure of the location and the light condition, it creates totally different paintings in a way throughout the day, constantly changing. Then this is a series of mirror piece. I made a mirror screen as another, in a way, another meta painting for me, because this was my reaction to the classical Korean Pyeongpung, which is the screen painting. I try to make a contemporary painting using the mirror panel. So perhaps we can, yeah, it was from Axel Vervoort Gallery. And then I had this series of Thread Roots filmmaking since 2010 up till 19, conveying the world textile culture and its performative action, and also the local garments and craftsmanship, juxtaposing with the natural, local natural elements and architectural elements. That is always echoing, one another. So I made in Peru the weaving and and embroidering, knitting. Then in European cities, the lace making series, and in India also the sewing, weaving, embroideries, and dyeing. And in also China, visiting all the nomadic, also the minorities, such as Dong minority, Yi minority, or Miao minorities. And then I visited also the Navajo and Arizona and New Mexico area to also film all the local weaving and nature. And the last one I did was in Morocco, also in Fez, also their mosaic making, juxtaposed with the local landscape, such as the sand dunes, and so on. So partially also, Jaeho also created this kind of architectural form that you created in a way architecture, kind of a video architecture, right? So maybe you can talk about Archive of Mind. We could, because Jaeho created a series.
So in the interest of time, I think we should move a little faster. The Archive of Mind project began back in 2016 at the National Museum of Modern Contemporary Art Museum in Korea. And it was an invitation for audience to participate in a collective performance of rolling a ball of clay with bare hands and leaving one on a large table. And over time, it would amass into a constellation of shapes of mind, let's say. And this ball of clay begins from a lump of clay that's distributed from one side of the gallery, and it begins as a shapeless or abstract matter, and it slowly begins to form into a sphere by the two palms rotating about a center, which is outside the body. And there's always an axial movement circulating. So this becomes a performance, a participatory performance that is akin to wrapping a bundle, wrapping the bottari, which is in a way a shaping of a void, that takes on our temperature, our state of mind, our geometry of mind. So in the end, an empty table, what started as an empty table becomes a new tableau, a new painting, which is also a sculpture and a performance. And this iteration took place in multiple places around the world. This one was in Poitiers, where Kimsooja was given a carte blanche to essentially take over the entire city. The commissioners gave her keys to every monument that the city had to offer. So this one was in their old Palace of Justice, and we made a 60-meter table here. And it was accompanied by a sound of clay ball rolling. So that is also another way of unwrapping the geometry of a sphere of the clay ball. So it was also the sound of the geometry. And where they used to have offices for the judges, we did another iteration of To Breathe, lining the floor with a mirror surface, extending an existing void of architecture down below to really maximize the void to the edge of the skin of the architecture. And here we see at the Chapelle Saint Louis the pottery truck, which has to do with also migration, dislocation, perhaps diaspora. And this container piece, pottery container, was particularly meaningful because it holds the belongings of Kimsooja that she collected and used over the course of 10 years while she was living, 20 years, yes, while she was living in New York. So it has all the furniture, all the books, personal belongings. And this happened at the time of COVID, where she relocated to Seoul, and it really kind of runs in parallel with the theme of Traverse, which was the theme of this big exhibition, and marks a threshold of an artistic and personal life, and you become a nomad once again. It's a flag piece that was done for the Olympics, and here we see the planted names again in a religious context. So maybe we should mention this project.
Yes, this project was a planting project during COVID that I conceived, titling, sewing into painting, planting flaxseed in the field. Half of this was flaxseed for fiber making, linen fiber, and half of them were to make the linseed oil, which is the medium of the oil paint. So after all this planting and harvesting, and the whole process was really touching and beautiful and meaningful for me. and gave a lot of hope when I was in the most difficult, also personal level, and also, everyone had COVID, isolation and difficulties. So after that, these fibers collected and wove into a fiber, linen canvas fabric, but also the linseed oil. And then I created a series of a meta painting using the linen canvas as it is, which was not needed to be painted or to be worked on, and presenting as it is. And also the botari also exists with the existing linen fabric itself that shows more of the minimal and also structural elements of it. So these, also the other piece, laundry field, was also collecting hundreds of Swedish bed sheets blowing in the woods. That was also part of the installation.
So here we want to show you a short clip of Kimsooja's installation at Leum Samsung Museum in Seoul. This was done at the at one of the galleries designed by Mario Botta, and we installed diffraction film over the skylight to bring down color and sunlight to the lobby. And depending on the season, the time of day, changing angle of the sun and the position of the viewer, the piece changes, evolves, and shows different aspects of an existing space and a sense of the passage of time. And the piece really breathes with the architecture, with the environment, with the seasons, and it moves at a time that is, in a way, different from or slightly out of bounds of the human senses. So here we show an example of how the piece changes over time. And during summer solstice, you can see the colors reaching down to the basement lobby level, and it forms a perfect circle once every year.
And this was done in the 21st Century Museum in Kanazawa, in the context of Yves Klein. And then this was done in Zurich in Gallery Tschudi. As you see, we placed the diffraction grating film on the window surface without doing anything. But depending on the interior structure and the light character and intensity and the directionality, and the day of the time of the day, it creates a totally different paintings. And this was also like nano painting in a way, using the polymer, nano polymer, as a meta painting.
This was a project in Cistern, which is part of the Frederiksberg Museum in Denmark, and used to be the city's water reservoir. So they have a very special space where they can control the water level. And it's in complete darkness, separated into 3 different chambers. I believe it was 4,000 square meters in the area. And it had a very humid, eerie environment, and we wanted to bring light into this cavernous space. And it was really a laboratory of different lighting design, different kind of angles of moving through what is almost like a hypostyle hall.
Yeah, this was the first attempt to conceptualize the light as a weaving method and a weaving device.
This was a performative piece in Meridiano, which is a project space in Puerto Escondido, Mexico. And for its inaugural show, Kimsooja did a performance where that was never seen by anyone except the photographer, but she felt the space was already full, already complete. So she just placed her body against the physical spaces in particular time, under shadow, in sunlight, and also bringing in natural elements such as fire and stone as a performance, and also another pottery that was left behind. Some other iterations of To Breathe pieces. So really you can see a single piece of work that's infinitely variable and takes in the surrounding context and architecture and becomes an invitation or a stage for audiences to participate as active performers, giving them the authority to occupy that space. And again, some other iterations of meta painting and To Breathe.
And I also created a series of ceramic pieces. This was done at Sèvres in France, in Paris, that I conceptualized the Korean moon jar as a bodari, in a way, by, in a way, enwrapping the void, except the one, making one needle hole on the top. In a way, the construction is almost wrapping the soil with the, wrapping the void with the soil, moving like a vertical, but at the same time, the circular orbiting movement. So this was also done in Meissen manufacture in Germany for Humboldt Forum. And also some of the sewing into invisible needle, invisible thread, sewing into soil, actually. It's almost like a sewing, the needle, but at the same time planting or sewing onto the earth, soil. And this was also already in my career in 1988. I made a piece called Agriculture, using the sewn pieces together with some painterly elements on canvas. When I felt the cultivating the land and agriculture, planting as a painting field. So those void I create in a way with the needle opens up breathing space, but at the same time, these hands I casted with my own arms touches, two fingers together to meet together as if I sew them together. But when I connect, it creates a void. And this was, for me, also interesting because there's always opposite element in making it. Because I, in a way, worked a lot with the duality of the matter and the structure of the world and the character of the nature of the life. So this time I used my yoga mat for almost 10 years in New York, and the traces of my geometrical movement, unseen bodily movement, is left as a trace, but bodies disappeared. Only the remain traces are there. And those are also from my breathing performance, just one segment of breathing in and out. So I call it one breath. And it has all the vertical and horizontal element in it. And first time I actually placed my Bodhari piece inside of the vitrine to compare with the Bodhari Munjar. And this was also exhibition installation seen from Humboldt Forum. And this one also has 3 chants in it, juxtaposed together with the Bodhisattva they have. And one jukebox speaker has my own breathing sound, and the other one has the 3 chants in it. So it all like woven the whole space next to the Bodhisattva. And this, again, in Humboldt.
So I want to maybe introduce this project as our first collaboration, and also the first instance of designing and building a structure together. This piece is called A Needle Woman, Galaxy Was a Memory, Earth is a Souvenir. It was done for the inaugural Cornell Council for the Arts biennial. It was erected at their art squad. And we work with nanoscientists at the materials lab, Uli Wiesner. At first, Kimsooja was shown a series of research that the lab was doing, and was presented with a small vial containing an iridescent matter. And this nanopolymer that the scientists were researching was actually being used for cancer research, to visualize cancer cells while doctors operate on the patient. So it very much comes from the body, and it also has a molecular structure that creates a structural color, essentially a banding of blocks of molecules that refract specific wavelengths of light. And to give it form and to translate into an artistic language, Sooja wanted to build a pavilion, and we came up with a needle structure. Actually,
Jaeho just presented this design, and what about this? And that's how we started first the solid project together, right?
So she's been working with the idea of a needle for ages, and we figured, why not build one? So this is our first attempt. And before getting into the scientific aspect, we designed and built the hardware in different pieces so it can be transported. And they were made in China and brought to Ithaca and was erected. This was a critical kind of point where the needle point was about to be complete. And we want to show you a short video explaining the project.
There's levels of engagement between art and science that can be very artificial.
This was the
But when you
curator,
approach it being committed to not knowing what you don't know and be responsive to that, then a lot of generative and surprising things happen. Scientists don't know sometimes what the question is, and they have to process and go through a kind of material exploration before they know what's a good question. And that struck me as being surprisingly similar to what artists do.
This is great.
I think that this is even better. I mean,
Yeah,
there are two. I don't know. I
It's
came
more
late.
sophisticated, I think.
This is more
no?
sophisticated. So this is a newer polymer. This has the entire spectrum. We never had that before. You know, a lot of the processes that are taking place in nature, and in particular in biology, are processes that take place at the nanoscale. What we showed Kimsooja originally was a vial where the polymer was dissolved in a solvent, but at relatively high concentrations. And so as you moved it around, the colors changed, and she just loved that.
This.
We had no idea that we were able to actually make films that show those colors too. So it was all up in the air at that point. But we were all very hopeful.
I think it's better to have
The question of scale was directly integrated into problem fabrication, and it was certainly another hurdle for us. The sample we have here is every level had to be custom molded along a mold with 2 different radii, top and bottom. It took a lot of trial and error to have this applied. The fabrication took place in China. When we installed the first panel, the entire fabrication team was very excited to see the iridescent polymer come together with the gridded structure of the needle.
The greatest pleasure was their amazing enthusiasm. I think we could only do that because we believed in that spirit, that we are all merged together doing something that has never been experimented in sculptural scale or in architectural scale.
Since this can be transported, and it was also designed as Kimsooja would put it, acupuncture of the earth. Now this piece sits in Yorkshire Sculpture Park in the UK. And at night, you can perhaps remember the title again, A Needlewoman, Galaxy Was a Memory, Earth is a Souvenir. So the piece really stands not as a sculptural object, but as a bridge to mediate different scales of reality, different scales of time, and connect us to a world that is beyond the register of our senses, in a way accepting our own limitation as bodies, and also uncovering something that is unseen in our eyes. And as part of the Archive of Mind project at the National Modern Contemporary Art Museum, we also produced a piece called Deductive Object, which is a first, let's say, sculpture where she uses the obangsek color as a wrapped painting. And
actually, this was my first returning as a painter, wrapping as a painting as a wrapping. So that's how I started this object sculpture piece, but as a painting.
So we thought this would give you an idea about the installation process. One architect mentioned that any act of architecture begins with a cut in the ground, and that's how we began. We also had to make a special gantry to hoist the sculpture in place and line the floor with mirrors outside. And this was a gallery space where we placed Archive of Mind, the first iteration, which was a collection of tables that span 19 meters in total by approximately 11 meters wide. And in a way, the space was so hard to fill, so we presented an empty canvas and decided to leave it empty, and the visitors would come and fill. And also, it's interesting to look at the afterlife of an exhibit and remember the trace of what once stood. And these are some other iterations of the deductive object. And just to comment on the elements of this piece, whenever Kimsooja uses diffraction film or a mirror surface, it's really about the question of canvas surface and posing a threshold that could mediate between self and other, between reality and virtuality, between different, let's say, between an inside and an outside. And here where we have a horizontal surface that reflects sunlight and enwraps reality with its counterpart as a virtual image, the surface of the sculpture absorbs light and it actually hides the surface. So all of these elements are questions that evolve through different sites, different medium, different context, but essentially they are the same question, returning to her position as a painter. And this was a permanent stained glass project for Saint-Étienne de Metz, Cathedral Saint-Étienne de Metz in the city of Metz, France. And there were existing diamond gridded structure in these bays that we took as our basic palette and came up with different, these were very early iterations of stained glass. And we used 2 layers of glass, one, the traditional stained glass, colored glass, which was hand blown, and another layer, which was industrial dichroic glass. So on one layer, we work with transmission of light through the colored glass, and on the other, we work with reflection of light. So it also contains 2 different directionalities within a single plane of surface. And while moving, you see a variation in the surface. And in an urban context, this was a fairly recent project, opened in Paris at the metro station Marie de Saint-Ouen in line 14. And you can see that, we really begin with a crude model, but there's nothing better than really a scaled model, and we work with cell phone lights to simulate the lighting conditions and experimenting with different types of light at different distances to understand how the light would behave in space and to take that to the site. And this is before, during construction, and this is after when it was completed. And it brings in a little bit of color and light to what would otherwise be a pretty neutral space. And another public art project we did for the city of Leiden, which is, again, working with the idea of bridging, connecting different neighborhoods, wrapping the canal with a very simple structure that leans horizontally together. And it's in a way, it's really threading and speaking to the history of the city as a textile center of Europe at one point in history. And they were they housed the institutions for authenticating European-made and especially Dutch-made textiles. And I'm just gonna maybe quickly flip through some of the recent projects, another iterations of Archive of Mind, which begins with a drawing and assembly on site, and we have a fresh, clean table that gets populated with people's participation. And another public art project at Lafayette, Gallery Lafayette Haussmann in Paris. This is, in a way, for the first time, we addressed the space between two domes. One, an inner dome that's an historic stained glass dome, and the outer dome, which was renovated after the war. And we lined the outer dome with the fraction film to bring in a palette of different light into this newly discovered space within the department store, in dialogue with the traditional stained glass that you can see from the inside. And as you walk through, you are bathed in patches of color. And we just have 2 more projects to show you. I think we're running out of time. Yeah, this was a recent project in Saudi Arabia, Alula. And we were given an amazing site. And the project has to do with time. The light traveled from perhaps the beginning of time, and also the landscape that has layers of sedimented history as a geographical form. So we came up with a spiral form that one would walk through and really function as almost like a sundial, changing with the angle of the sun throughout the day. And here we have it on site with the verticals in place and the surface, and the intensity and the color spectrum varies. And this project you can see now in Paris at Bourse de Commerce. This is the latest iteration in what used to be a grain storage building and a market, and also a commerce exchange at one point. And it's now transformed into a contemporary art center. And we completely emptied the center, in a way, extending and amplifying what was already a great piece of architecture renovated by Tadao Ando. And you see all the different performances that takes place every day. People love to lie down. They actually spend hours there. And this piece really addresses the verticality, the axis of body, and is echoing the ideas of the needle. And also, it's a question on our place in this time, where we stand, and it also brings a different awareness to ourselves and others.
This is all we have. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much.
We have time for a couple of questions. If you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Danny.
Thank you so much for sharing your amazing scope of work in today's presentation. As I contemplate your extensive journey of works of art, I witnessed forms and locations undergo external transformations as a needlewoman, beggar woman, or laundry woman, or a mirror woman walks into different fabrics of humanities. But your identity as being, apart from doing performance, endures as the intrinsic nature through the transformative matters. So how would you describe the essence or nature of your identity and how it affected and transformed your work?
I am still trying to find my identity, I think. So in a way, as I present the rotunda space with a mirror in Bruce de Commerce, I consider the space itself as a body, and also, in a way, bring the wholeness of the place. So that, in a way, it's like two domes put together, up and down, as if we make Botari Munjar, placing the mirror as a medium that connects and divides between the reality and virtuality. But at the same time, I use a series of vitrines around, as if it's my bodily kind of extension, like of hands and fingers, showing all different types of works I've been experimenting in different objects, in different prints, or the sculpture or botaris and things like that, so that it is almost like placing my body and question on the botari as a central location, questioning on that, unseen answers and mysteries of our life and body constantly from different angles and different methodologies, and so that I reach to the totality of life and art. So it's a whole process, but I think it's cyclical also. So when I did the sewing into painting, the planting project in Vanus, I felt that this is really returning my first question as a painter after 45 years or so. So I've been always like a circling around, questioning different aspects of life and art, each time questioning, its own identity in a way. So in the end, I would, expect, or maybe it may not reach to that point, but my aim is to reach to that totality in life and art, not as a singular answer or question, but everything in it. Yeah, I don't know if it can answer your question.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
That's our time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.